Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 80 of Literacy in Color. Today's episode is a must-listen for anyone working to improve reading outcomes at scale. I'm joined by doctors Stephanie Stollar and Stollar Brown, two highly respected voices in the science of reading and MTSS spaces. Together, they're the co-authors of MTSS for Reading Improvement, a book that helps schools move beyond compliance-driven practices and towards systems that actually improve reading outcomes. In this conversation, we unpack why strong Tier 1 instruction is the foundation of effective MTSS, how data should guide instructional decisions rather than student labels, and what it really takes to create a culture where educators feel supported, collaborative, and focused on results. If you've ever felt frustrated by MTSS that perhaps looks good on paper but doesn't quite move the needle for students, or if you're wondering how to align science of reading practices within a coherent system, this episode and the book MTSS for Reading Improvement are for you. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. And today's conversation is one that I'm really excited to share because I'm joined by Drs. Stephanie Stollar and Stollar Brown, who are two deeply respected voices in the science of reading community and literacy realm, and truly, in my eyes, the queens of MTSS. And they have co-authored MTSS for Reading Improvement, and they are going to share all about their book today. They bring vast knowledge around these systems of support to really strengthen Tier 1 instruction, your intervention settings, all of the supports happening in your school to build a really cohesive framework. So I'm excited to welcome them to the show today. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Michelle.
Would you like to take a moment to briefly introduce yourselves and share a bit about your backgrounds?
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah. I work with schools around the country to build leader and teacher confidence around taking action with screening and progress monitoring data as part of their MTSS, and have been doing this work for several decades now, more than we'd like to count sometimes, and have really had the opportunity to do this type of work since right away after college. So I went to graduate school for school psychology, but not how most people think of school psychologists. I have never given an IQ test in a school. And so that type of school psychologist, right away, I was teaching reading my very first year as a school psychologist and had the opportunity to learn about what we now call science of reading at that time, and then was all also doing practices that we now call MTSS at that time. And so that's been my entire career working in schools. I was a special education director, and then at the State Department in Iowa as a chief of a bureau there, and then worked in industry for a brief period of time, and now consult full-time with schools around the country and just really enjoy the opportunities I get in classrooms with leaders and teachers all the time.
And I'm Stephanie. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. And like Sarah, I work as a consultant to help schools increase their reading outcomes by learning about and implementing what we now call the science of reading. And similar to Sarah, I learned about what we now call MTSS in graduate school and implemented it as a school psychologist. And then also at the state level through a statewide project where we integrated academic and behavioral supports in a tiered system. And then I had the opportunity to support educators to use the Acadience assessment when I worked for Acadience Learning. I've worked as a university professor in a couple of different places, and I really enjoy my work now when I get to talk directly with teachers. That is where my heart is. I am not a teacher myself, so I have so much respect for the work that teachers do every day. And I think that has driven the work and the writing that I've been doing, especially lately. So thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today.
Of course. And forget about the Chinese zodiac. It's the science of reading zodiac, and it's the year of the book.
Nice.
We have 3 books coming out with Dr. Stollar.
Yes, busy. And Sarah and I are working on another book. So
exciting.
Yeah,
how
busy.
exciting. So how did your co-authoring collaboration come to be? I love that you both have backgrounds as school psychologists.
So both of us, I think, I don't want to speak for you, Stephanie, but both of us have been experiencing for the past several years of more and more teachers and leaders have been implementing the science of reading. The folks that we work with who are really passionate about it were getting really frustrated because they were implementing these good practices and not seeing a lot of real school-wide results. They had stories of students that they were helping in pockets, right, of success within their schools, but they were still frustrated at how overwhelmed folks were and how they weren't really seeing all the school-wide impact that they've really been promised and hoped for. And what we saw through our work and the work that we've been doing for a long time was that what the problem was in many of these cases is that we were coming at every single need as an individual student need. And so we just saw this gap in the literature and the conversation that was happening really nationally on a deep level or a wide level, at least, around this. And so given that you heard we have similar background experiences in that we were both in places where we had some time to write a book, potentially. And so, yeah, we decided to tackle this space that we thought the conversation was needed. And it's been exciting. Frankly, it's been more than I've expected in terms of the amount of people who've also agreed that it's been a conversation that's needed.
Yeah, it's been very gratifying. And this is all Sarah's good idea, is the honest truth that she's right. We were both having the same experience, schools adopting new assessments, but no time for teachers to meet together to talk about their data. And they were adopting new programs, but the schedule didn't allow them to implement the whole program, right? So these things were happening as random compliance almost activities without any overarching framework or coherence to the planning. So when Sarah reached out, actually, we were having a conversation about how I was learning to say no because I had too many things on my plate. And she still went ahead anyway and pitched this idea for the book. And it was such a good idea that I instantly had the right instinct to say yes. And I am so grateful and thrilled that I did, because we are seeing the opportunity to bring together the science of reading and MTSS so that people are not exhausted trying to implement these as separate ideas.
I'm also really excited that you said yes, Stephanie. For me, it's just an equally great
Yeah,
collaboration.
it's been fun, really fun.
I love that. And this book is quite the gem. It has blown up, and I think it is so needed in our current landscape. And you think about things like MTSS and RTI, and they're not new constructs. They've been around for decades even, and yet our scores are not looking so well, even with state initiatives to align things to the reading science. And so there needs to be some kind of underlying framework to make this good work possible. And I think your book really outlines that and gives really great guidance for schools to make the right type of instructional decisions rather than just adopting a new program or taking on a new assessment, because that in of itself isn't going to move the needle.
That's right.
So, what are some things that you think schools are doing when they believe they're implementing MTSS, but it really is undermining this whole idea of improving reading outcomes?
Well, I think many schools implement MTSS as sort of a sorting activity. So they think it's about sorting students into tiers, do screening, maybe do some diagnostic assessment, and assign students to tiers. This is problematic. This is not what MTSS is all about. There's misunderstandings about what the tiers are. They are resources. They are systems of support within your school. They are not places. They are not times of the day. They are not spots that we put students in or assign them to. So I think that's one of the most common misunderstandings that I say. People say they're doing MTSS, but what's lacking often is this real honest recognition that this is hard work, and we are turning the Titanic here. We are making massive change in the way that we, the adults, behave in schools, and that's hard. And not everybody wants to go along on that journey. If it was simple and easy to do, we would have already done it. So I think one of the big realizations, you mentioned we've known about MTSS for decades. Why are we not doing it? Well, because it's hard and because it takes recognition of the effort. It takes leadership to get out in front and say, this is the direction we're going. We are going to change our behavior. Some of you are not going to like it, but we're going to stick to it anyway until we get the results that we need to for our students. So that's why I think it's complicated. It's different in every system. There's not one clear-cut set of things to do that are simple solutions. It's much more context specific, which makes it challenging.
I agree with everything Stephanie said. I think another thing that's related to that schools then can do instead is we're starting a lot of meetings, and I think it's related to what Stephanie said, that sorting activity, by talking about individual students and how individual students are doing. And one small shift that schools can make to just change that to be more aligned with a framework that we know is more successful for schools is to just start those meetings by taking a system approach. And so to start by asking a question that's more about the group. So for instance, if I'm looking at screening data and we're in a second grade team, instead of saying each second grade teacher is looking at their list and saying, I wonder what happened here with Sarah, like what was going on, right? I wonder if she didn't feel well that day, or I think her parents are going through something, right? Instead of looking individually, maybe we should have the first question be, hey, let's look at this report that shows the whole second grade all together. Overall, are most of our second graders on track in reading? And if not, then maybe let's take a step down and see, well, which areas of reading maybe do we need to spend some more time intensifying? Take a step back and look at that system level view before jumping in to individual student needs at every single meeting you have. If that's a screening meeting, a meeting where you're talking about interventions, whatever that looks like, start there.
That's such great advice. And it's such a paradigm shift for so many schools because it's business as usual to identify the kids who need support and provide intervention from the get-go, where we're not taking this bigger picture approach to look at, hey, is there something we could do in the first place to prevent XYZ down the road?
Well, and a lot of the issue right now in a lot of the schools that I'm invited to be a part of, is that there are too many students who need individual intervention for us to meet all of their needs. So if that's the way we approach our meeting, we're going to be there all day and we're not going to get through all of the students. And we don't have the intervention resources to provide them each with interventions. And so we do things then that don't actually end up accelerating student growth. And that's why we're here, right? Where we know what to do. We've learned a lot about the science of reading. And we have some interventions in place, and we've invested in some really great programs and some really great materials, and we've trained folks, but we're not seeing the outcomes because we're going at it one student at a time. Whereas we need to sometimes take a step back and say, okay, if we have too many students who need interventions, then that's where really Stephanie, I think, was speaking to when she said the tiers are about resources. Then we really need to say, okay, then we need to look at the resources maybe within tier one, because that's where the most resources are. How can we use these resources and intensify those to help more students? So it's about getting everyone help right when they need it. It might just be using different resources than what we've traditionally thought of using, because we just have more students who need those resources than we have capacity to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so appreciate your sentiments too, and saying that this work is hard and it's not easy, and honoring and respecting all the efforts that classroom teachers are pouring in and day out, because sometimes it can feel so defeating. But sometimes teachers want to close their doors and do things that they think are aligned to the science, but you're not going to do it alone either. We need that whole system working together. And when you think about sometimes how we have our MTS efforts breaking down, in your consulting experiences, have you seen any patterns of one thing that is more of an issue than others in terms of maybe leadership or data usage or scheduling, a whole battery of things that might be preventing reading outcomes?
I think it varies in different schools. I think the thing to start to approach it at is that MTSS is a framework. It's not a roadmap. So there's not one right way to do things. It's really going to depend on your students, your team, your resources. I often say it's a lot like a girls' trip. And so my hobby is girls' trips, and every girls' trip is different, but we always have to attend to some same things. So we always have to decide, where are we going to stay? Are we going to get an Airbnb or maybe stay at somebody's cabin? What are we going to do? Are we just going to kind of rot on the couch all weekend, right? And just talk and catch up? Or are we going to get dressed up one night and go out to a nice dinner? And then the most important part for me is always what we're going to eat all weekend, right? Planning for that. It's going to be different every single girls' trip. And we have to attend to each of those things for a successful girls' trip every time. And the same is true with our MTSS. So you have to attend to some of those specific things. In our book, we talk about those levers, right? Like those levers of success. And so we have to attend to those pieces, things like our data use, things like our leadership, collaboration. So those pieces we have to think about. And so schools just always need to be attending to those. And it's about thinking about, as a leader, as listening to your team, seeing what's happening in your system and with your data, listening to your teachers to identify, okay, right now, like what are the things that we need to attend to right now? Because we do need to make sure that we're not dropping off on any of them, that we can have really great assessment tools. For instance, we can have the best screening data, but if we don't have time for teachers to use the data, if we don't have any collaboration built into the system, I can tell you, I haven't seen systems where the teachers are using data in those situations. And so we have to really attend to each of those pieces. So it just kind of differs in different places. I think our tool A1 in the book, we have a document that's designed to help teams start to think about, like, where might we start to jump into this work? What might be some things that we could be thinking about?
So helpful. And I love that analogy. It's such a great way to think about it. And that's precisely why this is such hard work, right? It's not just a plug and play formula that one initiative will work for one school and you try to repeat that somewhere else and they might not have the same outcomes because there are so many variables at play. So I love that perspective on things. So maybe we could take a moment to dive into your book now. So you have it organized in 3 different parts. The first part is all about the reading science. And then the second part is about engineering that robust system of support. And finally, you end with enabling educators to improve reading. So first of all, why was it important for you not just to write a book on MTSS, but to ground it in reading outcomes and making sure it's moving the needle in literacy?
Well, this is where MTSS started, is about reading, because in the reading research, we've known for quite some time that we can actually prevent most reading difficulties from occurring by the end of first grade. And yet that is not what we are bringing into existence in schools. So there's a real gap there between what we know and what we're actually accomplishing and doing. And that's what MTSS is built on, is this attention to the first reading instruction. And this is where I think it breaks down for schools that I've encountered, is that the attention is on intervention. The attention is not adequately focused on prevention and classroom reading instruction. So to me, that's the natural point of overlap with the science of reading and MTSS, that they are from the beginning connected because of the fact that it's possible to prevent most reading difficulties. And even if students have neurologically based reading disabilities like dyslexia, it's still possible to impact the future outcomes for those students by starting early and by making sure that their needs are met all throughout their day, including in classroom reading instruction.
I agree with all of that. The other thing I would add is that we kind of approached it from a reading perspective also, in that I think it's really helpful to have something really concrete to apply these ideas to, right? So we could talk about teaming in general, but it really is helpful to apply it concretely. And a lot of what schools are struggling with right now is reading, right? So obviously an MTSS is a successful vehicle to support math improvement, to support social emotional learning improvement, right? To support behavior. Like all of these pieces are part of it. We have systems that are doing all of it, which is fantastic. What I tend to see in many of the schools that I work with is that starting in one place is often where they find the most success. And we approached it from here. This is currently an area where a lot of schools are focused, and we wanted to make MTSS really actionable for schools and teams. And so this is the way that we show it, but it's really just a vehicle. It's not the goal, right? The goal isn't MTSS and your processes and your forms. It really is. I mean, reading outcomes are the goal. This is just the vehicle to help your teams be able to do that.
We really do think alike, because what was in my head was MTSS is built for outcomes. It is what it is. The characteristics of your tiers or those components that you mentioned, teaming, assessment, all those levers that we describe in the book. The point is to get reading outcomes. So it's a natural marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke to this whole aspect of prevention versus intervention. And one of my favorite figures from your book, on page 15, you outline the simple view of reading, and then you underlay that with the 5 essential skills. And in other places, I think even in Reading Science Academy, you go deeper and you take something like Acadians and Tibbles, and then you take the measures from those assessments and plug those into the essential 5 within the SVR, so we can see what exactly are we assessing here? What exactly is the deficit here? And when we think about these frameworks, a lot of people are familiar with simple view of reading. How can we view this in terms of intervention, prevention when we're making instructional decisions?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that graphic resonated with you. For me, it's like the mall map. I don't know if they still have mall maps, but when you go to an unfamiliar mall, there's that big stand in the middle, and there's the star or some kind of a symbol that says you are here, and it orients you. So that's what I think that graphic does for me. It's a schema for the way I think about approaching, whether I'm talking about and working on an individual student or reader, or if I'm working with an entire school system. The simple view of reading gives me the macro level constructs. To understand reading comprehension, you have to have full functioning in word recognition and language comprehension. And that is from the very beginning. So for prevention, those set our priorities. Kindergarten students, when they first come to school, we have to have explicit and urgent focus on word recognition and language comprehension, not one and then the other, but both in tandem and interconnected. And our assessments drop a pin in terms of a progression of skills from phonemic awareness to the alphabetic principle to basic and then advanced decoding to text fluency and reading comprehension. Not that it's a linear progression. There's a lot of back and forth, but there's a general progression of skills we want to be moving students through. And we can prevent difficulties by using assessment to drop a pin, like placing that sticker on the mall map. You are here right now. And we know where you've been, the skills that you've already acquired, and what you have in front of you. no matter what grade you're in, we can get oriented to the big picture by using assessments to target where the student is currently and move them forward. For older students who we expect to be demonstrating reading comprehension, we can work that kind of graphic backwards. If we expect reading comprehension, there's just two categories that could be contributing to the student not understanding grade level text: language comprehension or word recognition, or it could be both. But we can chain backwards through that same sequence and find where the gap originates and bring our instruction and intervention to that sticker on the mall map. You are here. And then urgently, through our systems of support, move the student forward to that grade level expectation. So that visual just helps me orient my thinking, whether I'm talking about an individual student or a whole school full of students.
Yeah, I actually used that visual. I was consulting with a school recently about analyzing data to make targeted phonics small groups. And I brought your book. They wanted to buy your book. And I was explaining that whole schema as well. And it just clicked for so many educators. And you don't know what you don't know. And so many times we give these assessments and just for the sake of assessing because you're supposed to. But when we don't know how to look at it, well, it's confusing. And then you don't know how powerful it actually is.
And also teachers are bombarded with so much information, so many demands on their time, so many grade level standards, so much in their packaged programs that something has to cut through some of the noise and elevate what are the important, essential things that we should be focused on. So yeah, there's flaws, there's problems with the graphic, but I think as a general orienting schema, I'm glad to hear it was helpful for you.
Yeah, definitely. Express Readers decodable books have a special format with positive and complete storylines, highly controlled text, extra spacing and enlarged font to support all learners, and relatable, lovable characters. The books are colorful and durable, and the stories have a sense of humor with engaging, recurring characters to keep student interest. Express Readers Decodables provide the perfect place to apply learned phonics skills, support fluency building, and foster a love for reading. With alignments to most core foundational curricula and in-depth decodable book guides, educators can feel prepared without losing any prep time to create or plan on their own, nor any added costs. Be sure to check out the link in the show notes and ask for your free sample at www.expressreaders.org today. And then when we're viewing MTSS as this system of support, I know it can look different from school to school, but can you paint a picture of school operations, what something might look like in the day-to-day classroom just for educators to have more of like a concrete representation?
When we think about an MTSS as a system, I want to take a step back and just give a little bit of an analogy. So when we think about, oftentimes we've already mentioned this idea of thinking about individual students or going at intervention first instead of tier one first. Stephanie mentioned that, right? It's the big barrier she sees for many schools. This really comes to play in every decision that we're making throughout the day and in our MTSS meetings. So I think about this often as if let's say we heard about an accident that happened in our community at a local intersection. We could ask questions about, was the driver distracted? Were they on their phone? And those would be fine questions to ask. Did somebody run a red light? We could also take a step back and we could ask questions like, how many accidents have there been at this intersection this year? And how does that compare to other intersections that get similar traffic patterns throughout the year? And the questions that we ask really determine the actions that we take next. And so what I would say when you ask that question about what does an MTSS look like, right, than in day-to-day school operations, what I would suggest is that it might need to look a little bit different depending on your students' needs, your educator resources, and your context of your school. But what it often looks like is what it should look like is a really strong tier one, like first instruction. In this case, reading, as we're talking about today, that is really responsive in the moment to student needs, where teachers have the background knowledge as well as the skills to be able to differentiate right in the moment to respond, both when the what and the how I'm teaching. And then the educators feel supported and have support through the time, through the schedule, through their data they have access to be able to regularly be doing those checks on student understanding in general, and time to collaborate as a team to meet student needs when students need to be accelerated in reading or when students need some additional support in reading. The schedule should support that. The professional learning they get should support that. The coaching they get should support that. Everything else around them should support that. Stephanie said in one of the first times we met together around the book, she made the comment that everybody else's job in a school is to support teachers. And I've stolen that phrase and fully agree with that. And it's a very concise way of describing that. But that's really what I hope that it looks like in schools. And I think that's the way that we also make teachers' roles more doable too.
What I hear you saying too is asking the right questions. And one of the things in your book too is that collaborative improvement cycle. And we're going to be targeted with our questions and what things are within our control to change even, and monitoring the things that we're changing to see if they're working. And I just think it's such a great system.
I think that cycle is really the essential piece. And seeing evidence of that in practice is how you would know that a school is using an MTSS framework, that they are identifying clearly what the gap is between what they expect and what's actually happening, that they're surfacing the reasons why there's a gap between expected and actual performance. They're committing to a plan that they have the resources to actually implement, and they're not afraid to communicate that plan, but also know that they're going to collect data that if they didn't get it right with the first plan they put in place, they're going to cycle back around to making adjustments. And that's the heart of what they're committing to, not any specific practice or a certain program or referral process or a set of decision rules. So just a little bit further clarification.
Yeah. And you spoke about data as well. And when we think about making these instructional decisions or really intentional decisions based on data, what kind of data is really essential to be collecting? I know sometimes universal screening is all a school might have to get started.
Well, screening is a great start. It's very powerful because it is that crystal ball into the student's future. What is the likelihood that they will be an okay reader in the future if instruction continues the way that it is right now, even if that's specially designed instruction for a student on an IEP? The prediction is perhaps not good if what we're currently doing isn't working, and that'll show up on screening. So early warning is really important and valuable. But screening by definition and design is brief, and it's a set of indicators. And so it doesn't tell you the whole picture. There are many cases where that's insufficient for planning instruction. So you're going to have to follow up with diagnostic assessments that are not about diagnosing anything, but are about targeting the next step for instruction. And I mentioned that cycle, that decision-making cycle. You're also going to need measures that you can repeat over time, because one of the hallmarks of the MTSS database decision-making is that you're not using the tests that a school psychologist would do on a single day for making decisions, that you're using the student's response to instruction over time, looking at trend data. And so you're going to need progress monitoring information as well. So curriculum-based measures are the kinds of assessments that work really well. Instructionally relevant diagnostics, not norm referenced, expensive, specialized things that only a school psych or an SLP could use. I'm not saying there's not a role for those, but we have to perhaps not lean on those as much and use things that are most helpful for planning instruction and evaluating how well it's working. So I think that leaves out some categories of tools that teachers might have used in the past or still be using, things that might be linked to leveled books, like running records or the DRA, some of those assessments that were very familiar to teachers in the past that are not going to be as helpful and informative when you are implementing the science of reading in an MTSS framework.
Stephanie's new book, also, the book that just released, not the one we're talking about today, goes into really nice detail and really, I think it's just beautifully written and in a very user-friendly way with lots of examples and photographs of how to use those specific types of data as well.
Well, thank you. That's reading assessment done right. Kate Wynn, kindergarten teacher in Canada, is the reason why it's beautifully written. She's a beautiful writer, and she kept me between the lines in terms of making the writing connect for teachers. So all credit to Kate.
I just got my copy yesterday and
fun.
I'm going to read it this weekend. I'm so excited to dive into that one.
Thank you for that.
It's a gift.
Yeah. And when we think about data as well in terms of making changes within Tier 1 instruction, say our Tier 1 isn't looking so well, what are some of the instructional decisions that leaders can revisit before saying, put these kids in intervention?
Well, it's all about the instruction, right? I think we've had some really good efforts in the US and Canada and Australia recently about what to teach. And I think we need to really spend more time about the how to teach and supporting classroom teachers with what they need to deliver instruction that has a couple of characteristics, big idea characteristics, that it's targeted to what students need. So it's lined up with the assessment data that you have, that it is based on mastery learning, that it is not just, I covered it and I'm going to hope that they picked something up, but that we are not leaving this topic until we know the student owns it with a level of automaticity, that the sequence is carefully planned, that we're moving students from simple to complex skills, from easier to harder skills. We're teaching prerequisites before we expect the application or the generalization of skills, and that we're not thinking about the ELA block in separate chunks, but that we're thinking about the integration across these big ideas, that we're integrating phonemic awareness with spelling and decoding. We're integrating writing with teaching reading comprehension. So those are some big ideas, I think, that I'm trying to elevate. Sarah and I are working on a book together that will elevate those instructional components, because I think that's the next phase of this movement around the science of reading, is the instruction in the gen ed classroom.
Yeah.
I agree 100%. And I think some of the things then leaders could do immediately, some of the things I would ask are, like, as a principal right away, which parts of our lessons do we all teach every day, right?
That's
So
a great point.
maybe there are, right, some pieces. Which lesson are we on? I find this is super helpful. I start asking this as early as September, definitely by October. I'm asking, what lesson are we on and what unit are we on? Are we on track to get through everything by the end of the year in this scope and sequence? Because so often in schools, again, that I'm invited into, we have so much. Our curriculum materials right now are just jam-packed. The teachers just can't get through everything. So kids are getting out of they're getting out of every single year missing units of programs, and we can't expect them to be on track if we're not getting through even getting them taught the what. Just some of those pieces right away. And then make sure, Stephanie's hit every single one of these. So I'm just coming in with like something a principal could do tomorrow. Make sure that PLCs, grade level teams, are having conversation not just about that what, but about the how. So what are the evidence-based routines that we're going to use to make sure our students are getting enough practice? If we're focused on mastery, again, as Stephanie mentioned, then how are we making sure they're getting practice? What are the routines that we're using so we make sure that practice is super powerful and effective for our students? And so those are some things that we can do tomorrow that we can just be using all throughout the year as leaders, and just keep coming back to. This should be happening all the time at Tier 1. The teachers just continue to need support to be able to do and to make it feasible. And if I were a classroom teacher right now, I would want to be having time to talk with other teachers about, okay, our curriculum materials have 2,000,001 different activities and worksheets and different sections for each lesson. Which ones do we want to do? Which ones are going to be most helpful to our students given our data and what they need right now? Those are conversations we should be supporting teachers to have.
Yeah. And I love all of the actionable steps that you share right on the spot. And I appreciate explaining all of those core tenets of effective instruction too. And that's a big chunk of part 1 of your book as well. And you even get into some great examples from Anita Archer and what explicit instruction really looks like in the classroom and tips for that as well, which is super helpful because as we know, we're thrown this term, teach with fidelity to the program. And it's impossible. Like you said, if you have all of these hundreds and thousands of components to your program to get through it all in the day. And pacing is a beast when you're trying to hit all of those things. So it is so important to have those conversations to be on the same page. And it goes back to me thinking about the teacher who's closing their door and working on their own to move the needle. But we need collaboration. We need to see what's working for you and what's not working for you. And let's try to brainstorm together because that's where the magic really lies. And so when we think about what leaders have to do to really change outcomes in their schools, what mindset shifts do they have to take on when they want MTSS to be a supportive system?
Well, one of the mindset changes, I think, is to be focused on results, focused on the outcome, and recognize that this means changing our behavior, which is not easy for humans to do. And we can't just say it should happen and expect it will happen. So paying attention to the real factors around implementation, supporting the implementation, and maybe just being upfront about that mindset shift that we are not going to base our behaviors on what we prefer, what we're comfortable with, what's familiar, what we're used to doing, even what's in our program. That we have to really have fidelity to is the outcomes, the student outcomes. That has to be the guiding light and the driving force. And I think that's the leader's role. And I recognize how hard that is for people. So the book, and particularly the set of appendices in the book, is designed to provide leaders with that support. Here's how you can guide these conversations in schools when you're leading teams to be doing this important work.
That needs to be a sticker. Fidelity to the outcomes.
Fidelity to the outcomes. I love it. Another mindset shift that I think we have to make that starts with leaders and then it's the culture leaders provide is the idea that this is, I mean, Stephanie said it multiple times. This is a lot harder, not just in that there are lots of parts, but that doing anything new is hard to learn to do. Just like it's hard to learn to read, it's hard to change everything about how we've taught reading. And it's hard to do that while I'm using a new set of materials and I'm using new instructional strategies. I'm doing it with 32 kids in my class, right, who are all also new to it. There's a quote that I read recently from a Joyce and Showers article, researchers around instructional coaching, from early researchers around instructional coaching, from an article in 1982 that they wrote, where they were interviewing a college football coach. And they were comparing college football players to teachers as they were learning new plays versus learning new teaching thesis. And they were just having a conversation in this article. And it jumped out to me right away because I was like, I bet athletes take their jobs pretty personally, similar to how we do in education. And the quote really talked about how the difference between athletes and teachers is that athletes don't believe mastery will be achieved quickly or easily. But we've often behaved as though teaching skills are so easily acquired that a simple presentation, a workshop, or a demonstration is going to be sufficient to ensure successful classroom performance. And then the piece that makes me bring it out and show it on slides regularly is this last sentence. To the extent that we have communicated that message to teachers, we have probably misled them. And I feel like so many of us, I should just speak for myself, I feel like I should be perfect after I read an article, after I hear a podcast where I'm inspired to try something new. I want to be perfect at it. And I think so many times, and we take our job so personally, the teachers go into classrooms and they learn about the science of reading. They get some new materials they're excited about, and they want to do it perfectly. And we don't have a culture, and leaders aren't creating a culture and sustaining that and starting it by doing it themselves. where we're all vulnerable and saying, hey, like I tried this, it didn't go well, or being willing to say, listen, I did this and my students really got it. Other people should see this or should try it too. This might have been a fluke, but and being willing, right, to share those things. Similarly to how athletes videotape their games and their practices and watch them over. How can we create that same culture of being willing to be vulnerable about something that's so personal within schools? And it's not intended to be punitive, right? It's really intended to help all of us be able to work together toward that same goal of improved student reading outcomes.
Wow, that's so powerful.
I
And the
love it.
vulnerability is such a big piece to all of this work. And I love how you shared those examples as well, because it's so easy to say, oh, your letter's trained now. You should know how to do this, right? And Dr. Stollar was talking before how we're bombarded with information. We're not lacking information about the science of reading, but what does it look like? Studying our practices, studying each other. You were just saying an athlete recording their moves and they noticed how their toe was positioned on a certain jump, What kind of teacher moves are you doing that's breeding success and that we can make small tweaks to? And it's not to say you're a bad teacher. In fact, I think it makes you a better teacher to be reflective. And that's why we're always learning. So in your book, you give such a wonderful framework. If MTSS was actually to be implemented in the way that you teach educators to implement in their schools, what do you think would be different for a school or a system if they were to start from the get-go and then 6 months down the road, see some changes in place?
Well, they would see changes in their results. That's the bottom line. That's how they know that what they're doing is the right thing to be doing, is because it's getting increased student learning. But I love what Sarah emphasized a minute ago, that leaders asking teachers what they need, teachers being safe enough and empowered enough to speak up, right? And then working together collaboratively is what you would see, so that people feel okay and comfortable and actually excited about working together to try a next step and then monitoring how it's working and being willing to say, we tried something, it didn't get us where we need to go. We need to be thoughtful, but make adaptations to what we've been doing. I think for me, that's what you would observe. That is not what we always see in schools.
Yeah. And it becomes, some teachers can feel fearful of their leaders, and then they need to put up this facade of like, I know what I'm doing in my job. And so we need to break that down.
Yes.
It comes from like this humanity aspect for leaders to be supportive and to know that their teachers will need help on things, and that it's okay to need help, and it's okay to provide resources, because that's your job to make sure that teachers have the resources they need to do their job well.
That's right.
And if you were sitting down with a leadership team, what's one question that you would say, stop asking this and start asking this when we're thinking about these constructs?
One question I'd ask people to start asking, I'd want people to start asking are really questions that are guiding that collaborative improvement cycle. Those are really the questions that I want teams to be asking. What we find is that if I don't have something like that, then we're doing things like we're just going straight to implementing something because we heard about it, or it's what we do with everybody, or we never come back to see how things worked. And so without that framework, it's really hard. So I think the framework is what I want schools to be asking, where I think they're going to see the best results. In terms of stopping asking, I think try to get away from asking questions that are really focused about specifically on internal student characteristics or things that we can't control. It's not going to teach kids to read. It's just not going to teach kids to read. And there are lots of things happening, including things within students, including things in their families. Like, I'm not suggesting that these things aren't happening and that they're not impacting students in any way. Obviously, like we're humans, right? Like these things are absolutely impacting us. Obviously, like we're approaching everybody with care and with those pieces. But when we're thinking about teaching children to read, we need to be thinking about what do they need next to learn to read, and really focused on what our actions need to be to support them to do that. Sometimes when we're trying to explain data, because teachers are out of ideas of what to try next, we go toward those pieces of information because we don't know what to try next. And so that's my experience, because we're kind of out of ideas. And so we go there. So however we can open up toward more about, getting back to the action-oriented types of questions around the collaborative improvement cycle. That's where I'd be trying to stay in an action-oriented way that's focused on instruction.
And there's always going to be things that are out of our control that we're not going to have the ability to influence. But what are the things that we do have the ability to influence? And it all goes back to past notions of RTI and MTSS with like, oh, this kid is low and just stick them in special education because we don't know what else to do. Well, truly, we need to find out what's going to work for this child. There's got to be something that can help them, even if the progress is slow.
Yeah. And we always need to take students for the whole child, right? Like we're always considering everything we know about children. Nobody's saying you're going to learn to read and you're going to sit here in this one chair until you dry. Like, no, we're not talking about like harming children, right? Making them cry. If they're coming to school without having breakfast, the first thing we need to do is make sure they're fed, right? And we're teaching them to read. Like we're going to do both. We just also want to make sure that we're focused. When we're talking about reading, we really need to be focused on making sure that we're also really intentional about those pieces.
The question that I encourage educators to ask that I don't hear often enough is how many students scored this way? So I'm like a broken record on this because I've already mentioned it several times, but I'm thinking about school psychologists, interventionists, special educators who receive referrals from teachers, right? Because that's the procedure we've set up historically. Teacher notices a concern, they refer them to someone else. And so to break that cycle that's not serving teachers or students, I would encourage people on the receiving end of that referral to ask simply, are there any other students in your class who scored this way? How many students in first grade scored this way? So that we zoom out from that individual student focus and we ask the questions Sarah was referring to about the instructional context. And I would like to see questions go away of the nature like, is this a tier 2 student or a tier 3 student? I'd like to erase that one.
Yeah. That's a good one, especially when we think about the wonderful color coding on these assessments. That's a red kid. That's a yellow kid, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of it. It's so true. Those resonate with me as well, because so many times we're so quick to say, little Johnny doesn't know his letter sounds. But when we look at the bigger picture, half of the class doesn't know their letter sounds. And
that's exactly right.
That's why it's important to look globally as well.
So if we have a different question, we're going to have a different solution. Right. So
absolutely.
And the same thing is true for interventions. So we have students who've been through interventions and then we say, well, they've been through this intervention for 12 weeks. Now we'd like to refer them for an evaluation. And the same question Stephanie asked applies. So let's take a step back. For all the students who received that intervention, did the rest of them then, are they on track to meet their goal? Right? If so, then maybe I do suspect a disability. If over half of those students though are also not on track, then I don't know why we would single out this student, right? Our book actually has protocols, data protocols, and team agendas that help teams ask those types of questions.
So helpful. And then how would you recommend a school utilize your book across a year or how to get started?
Well, we have prepared a set of materials that help people use our book. The entire set of appendices is sort of structured around these cycles of screening and progress monitoring across a school year. So we have materials for use in these data team meetings, meeting agendas, data protocols that guide those questions. And Sarah and I have also put together materials for a book study so that people can, not just individuals, open up the book and try to use it, but work together as a group. So we call it the Facilitators Collaborative, and it gives folks access to materials like slides and talking points and discussion guides that can be used to facilitate a group of your colleagues through digging into the book and talking about applying it in your own individual context. And part of that facilitator collaborative experience is optional, of course, but monthly drop-in Q&A support with Sarah and I. So you can, in the moment, get your burning questions answered. If you're stuck implementing what's in the book, we can help unstick you and get you moving forward.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and putting this book out into the world. It truly was one of my favorite reads of 2025. And I'm sure Reading Assessment Done Right is going to be one of my favorites of 2026. But this really is something that's needed in our current literacy landscape. And I appreciate you taking the time to share more about it. And we're definitely going to link it in the show notes. And any final thoughts that you would like to share? Maybe you can also share where listeners can connect with you further.
Well, thank you so much. System Impact Consulting is my group, and I have an MTSS Data Academy that provides year-round support to schools that are doing justice work. So if this sounds like the work that you're doing, the whole goal of the Data Academy is to provide just-in-time support throughout the year to empower educators and then also help leaders just build capacity internally and confidence to do these practices on a day-to-day basis and to support their teams to really do these things to impact reading outcomes. And we have some schools that have gotten amazing outcomes in just a year's time, several different schools now. It's just been really fun. And you can find more information on my website if you're interested, or you can reach out too. Feel free to email me. There's a contact form. I'm happy to have these conversations about this topic anytime. These are my favorite things to talk about. You can also find me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So similarly, my website is the best point of contact for me, StephanieStollar.com. My primary ways of support are through my subscription memberships. One is Reading Science Academy, so support for learning about and implementing the science of reading. And the other is the MTSS Collective. So I hope that people will look into both of those opportunities.
Definitely. And I'm a Reading Science Academy member for life.
Thank you, Michelle. We love having you as part of our group.
Oh, I'm so delighted. And I'm so thankful to have you both on the show today. So thank you again so much for all that you do.
Thank you for bringing attention to the topic of MTSS.
Yeah, it's a great discussion. Really appreciate the conversation and insights. Really do.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.